Hello, everyone. Like Debbie said, my name is Stacey. I'm from Stacey's Custom Cakes in Jacksonville, Florida, and I have some exciting news. I have recently started the process of launching an online education system that I'm calling Edible Tech Guru, and it's available partially right now at edibletechguru.com. And I have a favor I would like to ask everyone. Lori, if you could share the Facebook link in the chat right now. So if you've ever started a Facebook business page, you know that you have to have so many likes and followers before they let you change the URL to something besides a string of letters and numbers. So I'm still trying to get to that 25 number. I think 25 is what they said it was before I can change the name on it. So I would really appreciate it if I could get a follow or a like on the page. That way I can get that changed over. But tonight what I want to do is talk about color theory. Now, a lot of us in kindergarten or somewhere else in primary art schools learned that red and green make blue. No, yellow, yellow and blue make green. Right out the gate, I've already skipped a line of my notes. Yellow and blue make green, yellow and red make orange, so on and so forth. But that's only half the story. And the positive side about learning that is you've learned half of it. Tonight, we're going to talk about that other half. And if you know about red, green, and blue being primary colors, you're already off on a great start to begin with. Now, the negative side of that knowledge is that's not very applicable to what we do in decorating, because you hear us talk a lot about CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is also called key in the printing industry. Why they call it key is irrelevant, but we just say black to make it simple. And those are the primary colors in a different color space. So what we want to talk about tonight is how all those colors play with each other and how they work with each other and what happens when you take one away or add one in, and talk about some of the concepts behind it. But before we can do any of that, we need to talk about what color actually is. And color is the way we perceive an object, not as it is, but as the light is reflected off of it. So I have a couple of slides here, and this is going to be some groundbreaking stuff that you've never seen anywhere in this world before. But the thing I want to start with is, if you didn't know it, grass is green. I know, it's crazy. Grass is green. But the question is, why is grass green? So when you take a look at grass, what you're seeing is a reflection of the color that grass does not absorb. Everything around you, every object you pick up, the clothing you're wearing, everything is absorbing and reflecting light. And that light that's reflected off of it is what you're actually perceiving with your eyes. And we give those different colors names. So fun fact, when it comes to grass, the chlorophyll in grass is what absorbs the non-green light in order to photosynthesize nutrients to make it grow. Because the color green does not benefit that photosynthesis process, it rejects or it reflects that color green. Another one we want to look at that's kind of wild and crazy is water. Did you know that water is blue? This is something I just learned earlier this morning. Water is actually blue. A lot of us have heard, stories about why water is blue. And a lot of people have heard the story that water is blue because the sky is blue. That's not actually true. Water itself, by itself, is actually tinted very lightly blue. And why is that? That's because it absorbs all the colors in the spectrum that are not blue. And that's the reason why water gets warm in the summer, because it absorbs so much of the high intensity light, such as reds and oranges and yellows and ultraviolet light. And that's what makes it warm up in the summer. But what is neat about water is if you stick it against another object, say a blade of grass, you can see that water takes on a green cast or a green tinge to it because it's also reflecting that color of green that's coming off the object. It's just an interesting property of water that I thought was fascinating. So what about the color black? Black is an interesting color because it absorbs all light. And whenever it absorbs all light, what you're perceiving with your eye is the absence of any light. And what's interesting about that is if you've ever looked at the school buses that drive around in your city or in your neighborhood, take a look at the roof. And if you would send me a picture of a school bus from your neighborhood, I could tell roughly what part of the country you're in, speaking latitude wise, how far north or south, based on the color of the roof. In the South, school buses have white roofs, and that's because white reflects all light. It's the opposite of black. Black absorbs, white reflects. But if your school bus in your area is further north, like the school buses where I grew up in Pennsylvania, the roof was always black. But why is that? Is that, a north versus south thing or some other crazy thing about the manufacturing? It has everything to do with the heating and cooling of the school bus. In the South, where it's a lot sunnier and a lot hotter for most of the year, they paint the roof white so it reflects light, and that helps keep the temperature down a little bit. In the North, where it's mostly cold, they paint it black so it absorbs more light. So if you think about the last few examples that I've given, you should notice a common thread going the whole way through the entire thing. The color that you're perceiving with your eye is the color that's being subtracted from the light reflecting off of the object. So the object absorbs all the light and it reflects some, and that's what you're seeing. So what that does is that creates what is called a subtractive color system. Now there's a lot of bits and bobs on the screen and a lot of words, but what I want to do is break it down to make it very easy to understand. So what we have over here on the left side are the three colors that make up CMYK: cyan, magenta, and yellow. So you should be used to seeing these already because you see CMYK everywhere. I'm not including black on this because we've just covered black in a pretty good detail. But if you look at the middle column, you'll notice that cyan absorbs red. And if you take it over one more column, cyan reflects blue and green. Magenta absorbs yellow and it reflects red and blue. Yellow absorbs blue and reflects red and green. So what is it about that that's so interesting? If you start looking at the subtractive colors, you'll notice a pattern. The colors that are absorbed by cyan, magenta, and yellow are the primary colors that we grew up with in grade school: red, green, and blue. So this tells you something right away, that when you have a color space where red, green, and blue are your primaries, you could, this isn't a technical term, but you could say the opposite of that color or the antithesis of that color is cyan, magenta, and yellow. But why is that? When you take a look at CMYK against RGB, or red, green, blue, you can make it very simple. It is just subtraction versus addition. So what does that mean? So let's take a look at addition, or the RGB color space first. Now, the reason why we're going to start here is because this is the one that a lot of us learned in grade school. What works about these colors is not that the colors are adding together, it's that they're mixing with light that's being projected through it. That's the reason why the display on your phone or the display on your computer or the display on your tablet uses a red, green, blue color space, because the light is projected through it. It's being filtered. So if you remember the video that Debbie used earlier this week to advertise the class tonight, you saw me take 3 circular color gels and lay them on top of each other. And in the center, where all 3 of them met, created the color black. And that's because they're subtracting. But if I took a red light, a green light, and a blue light and projected all of those together, you'd end up with the color white, because the colors are adding together. Flip that over now, and we take a look at the CMYK color space, or the subtractive color space. You'll see that all of the colors, when combined, equal black. And one of the neat things about Icing Images printers is that whether it's a cartridge printer or a blue printer, they include all 4 colors. And the reason why is, in the real world, due to inconsistencies in manufacturing of ink, and the same thing happens in the professional printing world as well. You go down to your local Kinko's or other print shop, you'll have the same situation, where if you would take full intensity cyan, full intensity magenta, and full intensity yellow and combine them, you'd end up with something a little bit more of a muddy, brownish, purplish, bluish sort of color, not a true black. And that's the reason why Icing Images includes black as one of the colors in all of their printers, so you get a true, rich, and vibrant black whenever you're printing.
Isn't that similar then when you mix frosting, for example? I think that's a really good way to explain it, is that the frosting, when you guys make black frosting,
yep,
I've heard this, what do you do when you create black frosting? Well, I take every color frosting I have and I mix it all together, and then I add black.
Yep, and then I add black. And that's 100% true. In fact, one of the examples I was going to use tonight is, if you have ever taken a class with Sydney Galpern from See Me Cakes, she will teach you an awesome little trick. So for my airbrush, I use the See Me Color Splash Colors and Dinky Doodle airbrush system. And oh, by the way, Sydney mentioned to me earlier today that the colors are on sale at her website. So if you take a look at all of her colors, and I have a complete set here, there's 5 colors. But a question that people like to ask is, well, where's brown? I want to paint something or airbrush something brown or color my ice malt brown. Where's the brown? If you take green and red and mix them together in almost equal proportions, not quite, but almost equal proportions, the combination of those 2 colors will get you brown. And like Debbie was saying, a great way to get the color black is just take all your leftover colors, put them together, and then add black to it. And that will make a very rich and vibrant color of black. And I've already got airbrush color on my hands. That's great. This is why I wear gloves. People at the retreat always ask me why I wear gloves when I'm working with colors, because color loves my hands. And I'll be scrubbing this rest of the night to get it off. But what's amazing about the subtractive color space is, if you take a look at these colors and you kind of turn your head sideways one way and sideways the other way, you start to notice a little bit of a pattern. And what happens is, if you actually take the RGB color space and rotate it 180 degrees around, look at what happens here. Your magenta, which is your primary over here in CMYK or subtractive, is one of your secondary colors over here. And the same goes with cyan and yellow. And then the opposite, where your primary red becomes a secondary. Your primary blue becomes a secondary. Your primary green becomes a secondary. Why is that? Remember what I said at the beginning? An easy way to think about it, it's not technically correct, but an easy way to think about it is, the opposite of one is the result of the other. That's the reason why your primaries over here are your secondaries over here, and your primaries over here are your secondaries over here. So let's actually do something constructive with that knowledge. So I believe that was the end of it. Yeah, that's the end of it. So what I want to do is show you an amazing website. It's called Facebook. No, it's not. It's an amazing website that Adobe offers. It's called color.adobe.com. And what's amazing about this is, you can use this as, and there's plenty others out there, but you can use this as a playground of sorts to learn about different colors and how they relate to each other. So we've done most of the technical talking, so let's talk about the practical part and how to take all that information and put it into something. And oh, by the way, if you're taking notes, there will be a handout posted on my website at edibletechguru.com. And in that download, we'll have my notes from everything I've talked about tonight and some extra material that I just don't have time to cover. So I'll talk a little bit about it, but you can go to the download to get the rest of it. But when
Hey,
you go to
Stacey,
color, I'm sorry.
just so you're aware, I'm going to post it up here. I already
Yeah.
posted the color.adobe.com. If you're, a lot of people use Canva, and
Yeah.
here is the link for Canva that does, I think, what you're about to go into. So
I think Canva does have it in there, but don't worry, I'm going to talk about Canva here in just a second.
Okay, I'm not worried.
So right here under create a color theme, we want to go play with this for a little bit. And what you have back here is a spectrum. Now, I know we're talking about CMYK, so just ignore this. We'll come back to that in a second. But what you have here is a color spectrum, and you have a thing called a color harmony. And a color harmony is nothing more than an artistic term that means it's how different colors are related to each other. So if you see how this ring or this wheel is set up, you have red on one side, green on the other, violet on one side, yellow on the other. And that's because those are opposite or complementary colors to each other. So if we take a look at this example right here, we have cyan on one end and orange on the other end. And you have these little blips here in the middle. Those blips in the middle are complementary colors. What that means from a scientific standpoint is that all these colors are related to each other in a straight line fashion from one side of the wheel to the other side of the wheel. What does that mean for the decorator? That means that these colors harmonize. Remember, we're using the word harmony here. These colors harmonize with each other as you go from one to another to another. So this example right here, and this is just the default one that Adobe loaded when I brought the page up right before the live. All these colors are pleasing when you add them to each other. Now, let's say that for whatever reason, this is too many colors. You need fewer. So you can hit this trash can to remove the swatch, or if you need more, you can hit the plus sign and it will add more colors going across it. And this creates a sort of gradient or a harmony of all these different colors that come together. But let's say you want something that isn't quite so muted. You want something a little bit more aggressive. Well, instead of it being complementary, what about analogous? An analogous harmony are things that cross multiple colors in the spectrum, but yet they're all still roughly the same distance away from the edge. So they still have a harmony to them. And there's so many different options in here where some of them I would probably never use on a cake, but like the triad, these colors are still related to each other. And even though they clash, they will clash in a complementary way to each other or in a way that plays off of each other in a great way. So like all of these colors right here, even though these aren't colors that I would necessarily combine on a cake or on a cookie or anything else I'm decorating, they still have a relationship to each other, and it gives me ideas on whenever I'm choosing a color palette. So one of the words that I just said there, I want to park on for a second. How does color make you feel? So for a moment, think about what your favorite color is. Why is it your favorite color? Is it because of the way it looks on you and you just feel good when you wear that color? Or is it because that color just makes you happy? So this right here is the philosophical portion, I guess you could say, of the way color theory works. There's absolutely no right answer to what color is your favorite and why it is your favorite. But in general, the way colors make people feel tells you an awful lot about who that individual is. And we've all seen the Facebook test, oh, if your favorite color is this, then you're this type of person. Or if your favorite color is this, you're that kind of person. In general, like most Facebook tests, there's a kernel of truth in there, but it gives you something to think about and unpack. So, for example, in many Western societies, like Western Europe and North America, the color red is very strongly associated with anger, power, control. I mean, what's one of the first things you think about every day when you see the color red? Stop the car. Red is a color that's very deeply ingrained in our society as having a specific meaning. Now, on the softer side, red is the color of love and passion and romance, and that's one of the reasons why it's so popular during Valentine's Day. But what do you think a person from the Far East, such as Japan or China, think about the color red? It's a totally different thing. Like, for instance, in China, red is the color of happiness. So you will notice, like during the Chinese New Year and other celebrations, like weddings and whatnot, red is everywhere because they associate red with happiness. So if you're consulting with a client and they're telling you things like, you don't even have to know who they are, what they look like, what their name is, anything like that. You're just texting with them. And they're giving you a lot of hints about their favorite colors, and they keep coming back to red. There's a possibility that they might not be Far East Asian in their descent, but there could be a lot of influence in that. For example, I did a cake that was anime themed for a person one time for their birthday, and they loved the color red. And whether or not they knew it, there was an impact on their perception of color. Again, the word perception. There's an impact of the perception of what red means to them. Another interesting thing, and red is probably one of the most fascinating colors in the world next to blue and green. But another fascinating thing is if you come a little bit further west from Asia and you go into like Central Eurasia territory and even Eastern Europe, a lot of countries that were formerly in the Soviet bloc, they have a very different opinion of red. And they associate red with communism awful lot. Now, that means that they could have a particular affinity or disenchantment with that particular color just because of that history of their culture. And again, there's no right or wrong reason for this. There's no science behind this. It's just a cultural thing, it's a personal thing. But in that handout or in the download, that's part of the, in the download that's available on my website for tonight's live, I have a page in there and it talks about, in very broad strokes, several different regions of the world and what the, a lot of the main colors, like the top 8 or 9 I selected, mean to different cultures. And there's a lot of interesting information in there. And if you love history and you love art and you want to see those two things collide in a way that just makes you really pleased, look into color theory and study the color theory of whatever culture you're curious about. And you will be amazed at the way you can provide a special, unique touch when working with your clients, when they realize you know more than just how to make something pretty. You understand their motivations and what excites them and what upsets them and things like that. And it will inform your decision-making process as you go about helping them find whatever palette it is that's going to make them love their artwork that you're going to create for them. So there's another website here I want to talk about, and this is the CMYK generator. It's at cmyktool.com. And on the flip side, there's a lot of great things about this website. On the not so flip side, they love ads. So there are ads everywhere on this website. But one of the things that I want to talk about in the practical application of CMYK, and the reason why I talked about it so much at the top of the hour, is because this is going to answer that question: why doesn't my red look the way I want it to? Or why doesn't my purple look the way I want it to? Or any other color. I'm just picking on red because it's the one that we've talked about a lot, for the last week or two. So the way this website works is you can punch in a number here, and in the CMYK color space, all of these numbers can go from 0 to 100. So it's just like grading a test. You can get a 0, You can go up to 100, you can go anywhere in between. And as I adjust these numbers, it is going to reflect down here. And this is live. So if I knock it back to say 57%, you'll see that that 57% results in more of a pinkish tone versus a full intense magenta. So if I add full magenta and full yellow, I get a red.
So
But,
equal parts is what you're saying.
I'm sorry?
Equal, excuse me, equal parts.
Equal parts, yep. Now I'm going for a full intensity color on this. That's the reason why I'm at 100 on both of them. And look at, think back to that color wheel we had just a second ago. I'm going to show you real quick on the weekly printer test page that I talk about a lot. Where yellow and magenta overlap, that's where red is. Now, if you want to find out why that is, you can come in here and you can start experimenting with this and seeing what different amounts of these colors will get you to the shade that you want. But if I come in now and I punch in 45% black, I now have an extremely rich and vibrant red color. And this is a color that I'm using on a palette for a cake that I'm doing next week for someone's. This guy got really lucky. His wife is having a birthday at the same time as Valentine's Day. So he gets to celebrate both at once. So it's a Valentine's Day themed wedding or Valentine's Day themed birthday cake. And he said, just go have fun with it. So I just went nuts with it. I'm having so much fun. But I really fell on using this rich, vibrant red color because I felt like this would be a color that would really symbolize everything that we talked about. And this is a color that also works really, really well for our discussion because a lot of the times on the Facebook group, whenever someone says, why doesn't this red look red? Or why does my red look pink? Everybody always, myself included, I'm guilty of it, always wants to go pick on magenta. Everybody loves to pick on magenta because perceptually, magenta is the closest color to red. So of course it's got to be magenta. If magenta is not right, then it has to be that. But let's knock magenta down to 76%. So I just knocked out a quarter of it. And look at how close that still is to that deep, rich, vibrant red that we had a second ago. It's very close. In fact, I could even go down to about 54%. It looks a little bit more orange now. But what about 63%? You're still getting that red. It's not as saturated or as dark, but you still see a lot of red there. But what happens if I do the same thing with yellow? A little bit of change, but not a great deal. If I take down a little bit more, it starts changing again. And what about black? If I just take black down to say 23, that made a massive, an absolutely massive change in what that color looked like. So if I put it back about where it was before and just knock it down to there, that's a massive change. Now you might say, well, I'm cheating. I knocked these down by about a quarter, but I knocked this down by about a half. No, I didn't. When you think about how a printer works, when the print head moves back and forth, there's nozzles on the underside of the print head, and it's spraying the ink downward onto your edible paper, or even your regular paper if you want to talk about your regular inkjet printer. So if you take all of those nozzles as a whole and call it 100, there's a lot more than 100, but let's just say there's 100 nozzles in there, and you take out a quarter of your black nozzles, that's what I just did right here. I took out 1/4 of the ability for the printer to place black ink on the paper, and it made this huge of a difference. So I'm not just cutting it in half by going from 45 down into the 20s. I'm only reducing it by about a quarter. And I'm rounding off the math just for the sake of simplicity. But anytime you are getting colors that don't look the way you want them to, the first thing I look at is your printer. Have you done a nozzle check? And have you used your printer recently in order to make sure that everything is primed and all the jets in the nozzle, all the nozzles in the print head are working correctly. And if they are, then there's another way that we can adjust the color that I'll talk about here in just a second. But always go back to that nozzle check. Always go back to your weekly printer test and diagnose what's going on. I'm working on something, it's probably going to be not next month, but the month after, where I'm going to start working on how to diagnose what color is giving you issues. But for right now, the thing that I want you to take away from this is if only 25% of your nozzles have a clog in them, that can make the difference between something being a rich and vibrant red or a very soft red. It's still red, but it's a very soft red. But if you start going through here and you knock all your nozzles down by 25%, that right there is a very muted looking red. And if that's the color red you're going for, that's great. But if you're expecting a dark, rich, vibrant red, then that's not what you're going for. So the nozzles are always the most important part on the printer. Yes, if the ink cartridge is empty, that's going to cause you trouble, obviously. If your car has no gas in it, the car don't go. But when it comes to your printer, if the nozzles are clogged, that's going to cause you a lot of issues. So what if you've checked your printer and everything is exactly the way you want it? In other words, it's functioning, but yet you're still not getting the colors you want. There could be an issue with the image. That's why we always talk about using a high resolution image, an image that is at a minimum of 200 DPI, preferably 300 DPI, because the more data you can feed the printer, the better result you're going to get. That will help with sharpness and clarity and color content as well. But a lot of apps that are photo editing or just design oriented in general, like Canva, there's a place in there where you can go and open up an image and adjust the color. I think, Debbie, you can correct me on this one. I think in Canva it's called a hue adjustment. And
yeah, it's under adjustments, and they have
okay,
all different.
Perfect. So if you go into that adjustment, it's going to affect the entire image. But if you adjust that hue slider back and forth, you'll watch it adjust the hue or the color tinting of the entire image in one area. And it could be that to get the color result that you want, you only have to move it maybe 2% or 3%, and that changes the color just enough that it comes out exactly what you want without it distorting the other colors in there. Now, if you're using other art programs such as Adobe Lightroom, Adobe Photoshop, Affinity Photo, oh boy, there's literally hundreds out there. I can't remember all of them, but they can do a more granular color control. And it's through a process called color grading, where you're taking certain colors and adjusting them to look exactly the way you want them to on the output. So we've talked about color theory being applied to creating a palette using color.adobe.com. We've talked about practically applying troubleshooting to your printer. And all of this we did just with simple knowledge that the subtractive color system is just the red, green, blue primaries that we grew up with flipped on their tail or mirrored. And it's all about thinking how these colors relate to each other and how they play off each other. So I definitely left time here for us to have some question and answers, because I know I covered a lot of really kind of heavier technical stuff compared to what I normally do, but this is something that I wanted to park on for just a little bit so you can understand some of the science of what's happening behind the scenes whenever you hit print on your printer.
All right, so I do have a couple, well, I have a statement and then we have a question directly about it. So when I saw you going through the last part where you were adjusting the red the reds and the blues and the blacks and the
Right
yellows
here.
there. I equated that to mixing colors with icing. What are
Absolutely.
you going to do? When I look at this example, it's even amounts of magenta and yellow and about 60% less in the black and that helps you kind of get to the colors that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I saw it. Now, everybody else may have seen something totally different. I'd love to hear what you all translated this to in your own mind and how you would apply this type of theory. Also, what I saw when you were playing with the color generation, showing the color wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So I use that a lot. Now, remember, I'm not a decorator, but I decorate in a sense when I'm looking at, like, for example, when we're rebuilding the website, what colors work well together. And so when I look at this color wheel, I know if I have a blue background, then a good complementary color is going to be right on the opposite side of that color wheel over in those yellows. And they complement each other very well in their it's the opposites basically and how those colors work well.
Exactly.
Um,
And and that's one of the beautiful parts about color harmonies and a lot of the things of color theory. It's, what does an apple smell like? Well, it smells like an apple.
it smells like
Okay.
red or
Yeah,
green.
it smells like red or it smells like green. Exactly. There's a concept here where you know what is right and what is wrong. You know what is right and what is wrong instinctively, but you don't necessarily understand the science behind why that is or the reason behind why that is. And that's one of the reasons why I picked on using Adobe Color here, because this website is amazing. Because, like Debbie just said, it's intuitive that a color on the opposite side of the color wheel from whatever you're looking at makes a nice looking combination. And that's, what's happening right here, where we're just going across. And that's what's called the complementary color harmony.
Yeah. And then something interesting too, we used to have a product called Deco Gel, and it's a long time ago. So there's very few people here that may remember it. Similar concept would be Isomalt, but Deco Gel was like a gummy bear. And you basically heat it up, pour it in a mold. And in a couple weeks, Jesse and Riley's actually going to be doing some lives around this. But what was really interesting is if we took green Deco Gel, poured it in, and put cherry flavor in, people still associated it with lime.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. It was very, very funny. Oh, Kim, you still have some Deco Gel. That's old. I don't think anything in it goes bad, though. But if you like that, which is good, tune in when Jesse Ann comes on.
I'm excited for that live.
Yeah,
I'm really excited for that one.
That product was awesome. It did a lot of really cool things, and the manufacturer is gone. And so this is the closest thing I think we've come to it in a very long time. So watch for that. Jesse Ann says, so the black has colors in it to make black. So this doesn't affect the results of your deep red. So black having a green or a purple base is what she's saying.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Black is a complicated color. If you've ever wondered why you have a black and a PG black in your printer, that's because in a non-edible style printer, there's two different types of black ink in there. One uses regular ink solvents like the other colors do, and that's the thin black one. The other one uses a pigmented black, and pigmented black is more of a solid kind of base that sits on top of the paper rather than absorbing into it. It's not quite the same as a laser printer where if you run your hand over it, you can feel the ridges where the printing is laid down. It's not quite that dramatic. So don't go rubbing a piece of paper to see if you can feel it, because you more than likely won't. But it's a different formulary of the color and the way it lays on the paper. And when it comes to the edible world of food, there's a couple of different ways you can get to black. One of the most popular ways is using green as a base and using blue as a base. And that's why sometimes a black might look more blue or might look more green. And a really neat way to divine out of your ink what color base it uses is start watering it down. So if you've ever taken a brush and you dip it into black gel color or black airbrush color or any other like not something you mixed yourself, but a like out of the bottle, we advertise this as being black. When you start to rinse it out, look at what color the water is tinged as it flows out of the brush, and that tells you what color the base is. A lot of your strongest blacks on the market are going to have a base made of green, and that's because green just works really, really well. But other manufacturers do other things. Some use blue and green combined. That's the reason why, like I said at the beginning of this, if you look at the color black, a black might look more blue or more green or more grayish if there's a little bit of white mixed into it. And that's because of what base is used in the color black.
Gotcha. So we used to, back in the day, that's crazy how long I've been around, and I'm thinking, oh, back in that period of time. And this is when inks, is a long enough ago that a lot of the blacks were not perfected, at least the way that we have it. And so I could tell you who's, like if a customer sent me something and they're having problems with color, I could tell immediately that's not our ink because it had a blue tint or a green tint or even a red tint to it. So that's why also in edible printing with the blue especially, that's why those 4 colors are so important in order to get the quality of colors that you want. That's what makes them rich and vibrant. Now, Evelyn had a question, and I was kind of waiting on this one a little bit. I think it's time for it.
Okay.
I know some of these answers, but I want to hear your take on it as well. So when she takes her edible printer, the cartridge-based ones that use paper, and she uses the copy function or the scan, so it literally scans the picture in and prints it out. If she does like a rainbow printer, or a rainbow picture, it will be kind of muted. But when she prints from the computer, and uses iPrint, it's very vibrant. Now, Heather was saying, well, it could be the DPI, which, and that's a setting in there, and it's based on the quality of the print. But I'm going somewhere else with it a little bit in my mind, because yes, she's right. I have a theory. I want to hear your theory before I talk.
Sure. So the way I've experienced this in the past is if you think back to the day when we had mixtapes, every time you would make a copy of a tape, the quality would degrade over time. And the same goes with VHS tapes. Any of the magnetic-based storage material will have that problem. But if you take that idea and now copy it over to the copy function on your printer, what you're doing is creating a replica of an original. And in this case, by making a copy of an image, you're now on the 3rd generation of that image because the original was printed. So the original was done on the computer, then the original was printed. So that's now the 2nd generation copy. And then you're going to make a copy of a copy. So that's now the 3rd generation. And this is a great experiment, you should try it. Take that copy and then make another copy of it and another copy of it and another copy of it, and then set them all up along each other and look at how the quality degrades as you go from the original print, which was the 2nd generation, down to the nth generation, however far you go. And the reason why that happens is a copy, we consider it a copy, but it's really more of an attempt at reproducing it. Because when you put it on top of the scanner bed, there's a very bright light. In fact, whenever you hit the scan button or the copy button and you hear it making that crunching sound that sounds like it's moving back and forth inside the printer, that's what it is. There's a very bright light tube in there. And what it does is it runs across whatever's on the scanner bed, and it's blasting that media with light, and then it's decoding whatever light is reflected. Then again, going back to subtractive color ideas, it's going to run math on all that color data to spit out a close approximation to what it is. And even the best quality copiers in the world are always going to have some degradation because you have a lot of things that can interfere with that. It could be the quality of the paper that the print was made on. Was it bright white, like 96 bright paper, or was it like regular copy paper that's more like in the 80 brightness range? Was it glossy? Was it matte? Was the ink in good condition whenever it was initially printed? Oh, by the way, there could be dust or smudges on the glass of the scanner. Oh, by the way, there could be some dust or something on the tube that's emitting the light. Oh, by the way, let's talk about, are the nozzles clogged on the printer or the copier? And you have all these mechanical or physical issues that can get in the way. And oh, by the way, it's also trying to decode what that reflected color is and then convert it back to something that can be printed. So that's the reason why a copy is great whenever you need, something really, really quick, but it's never going to be as good as the original, because just like copying a cassette tape, every generation you move away from the original, it's going to degrade that quality. Is that the same thing you were thinking, or did you have something else you were thinking too?
Yes, that was part of it, and I'm going to add to it as well.
Cool.
So, yeah, you were right there. You were hitting the part about when the light hits the paper on a copy, it is actually changing that color. I mean, when earlier before we came on, I was showing my camera, I was pointing it towards something on my screen, and they're like, well, I see a bluish hue in there. Well, why? Because of the way the light was reflecting off of it. It
Right.
changed it, even though that really wasn't what was there. So if you look at the top of the scanner, the lid is very, very white, and that also can mix with the white on your paper that it's printed on before it copies. So that can affect it. And back in the day again, and they still have, like when you have a matte paper, it has a little bit of a texture to it. Those will create their little divots that are creating little tiny shadows all the way through. And so that will affect it. A patch is a great example. And I think I used that on my video on our support section, where it talks about the way it interprets colors, that a patch has just larger divots where the string work is. And if you try to copy that, you're going to see a lot of shadowing, which will appear usually in a bluish hue on your image. So all of that will affect that. So those are just a couple of the things I wanted to add to it. But yeah, you were right on, which was good.
Cool.
Testing them.
She does this all the time.
I know. What do you think? So Evelyn had asked, but I think we may have answered. So how do you make it blacker if you get undertones? That would probably be, I would say, going into the contrast. So like if you're on Canva and you go into the color adjustments, you can actually adjust the contrast to change the little bit of that.
Yeah.
And then and she's now converted to iDesign. What?
That actually just kind of put me off on a rabbit trail.
Sorry.
So no, that's fine. This is somewhere I thought about going, but I wasn't sure if the conversation would go there naturally or not. But it did, so I'm excited because I get to talk about something else. When you look at an image on your screen, something you need to keep in the back of your mind is your screen is working in RGB, or red, green, blue. Your printer is going to work in CMYK. Yeah, I know, we just talked about that. But you need to have that in the back of your mind, because unless you have an extraordinarily well-calibrated monitor, and unless you know what I'm talking about when I say a colorimeter, you don't have an extremely high calibrated monitor. I don't even have a colorimeter. I can't afford one, nor do I want one. But the reason why I'm pointing that out is what you see on screen is never going to be what you get in print. That's why if you look at my printer test sheet, you'll notice that the colors on screen don't necessarily match what they look like on the printer. And that's because when I designed that sheet, I wanted something that was more close in the print production than what it looked like on screen. So that's why your magenta doesn't look quite right on screen, but it comes out looking right on the printer, because that is a tool, not a piece of art. So it has a purpose that comes higher than its appearance or the way it looks.
Gotcha.
And when it comes to that, if it doesn't look good to you on screen, but it looks great when you print it, you win. It doesn't matter what it looks like on screen. If it looks terrible to you on screen, but it prints amazing, you win, because your client is not getting your screen as what they're purchasing. They're getting the print that's going on your cake or your cookie or whatever else it is that you're providing for them. So disconnect what looks like on screen should be what it looks like on print. That only gets you so far, and that can create a false red herring that you're going to chase, trying to figure out, I want it to look good on screen. Okay, that's fine. It should look good on screen, but worry more about what it looks like on the printer.
Exactly. And that could get very confusing for people who call us many times and saying, well, it's not matching the screen. Well, it's not going to match the screen.
Unfortunately, it can.
Yeah. And oftentimes, like, there's a picture that we have people print when they're saying, well, this is wrong, the color's wrong. Well, I know what that picture looks like because it's one of my daughter that, that's been with me forever. And I know every color on that sheet, and we use it when we're testing because it mixes colors. I can see the mixing, I can see the reds, I can see the blacks, I can see the skin tones, and I know what they're supposed to look like. I know the hue of her skin. So it helps us diagnose things as well. Yeah, Barbie, stop showing off. She calibrates her monitor, but she's a photographer.
Barbie has a good excuse for that.
Yeah, rare. So Patricia said, so if an image that is browns, blacks, and grays prints green on my Canon, but the real colors on my HP, it would be the jets? It could be.
Very much could be. There's also something else to consider. There is your jumping manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So think about it this way. If you hop in a Chevy and you drive down the road, and then you hop in a Ford and drive down the road, and then you hop in a Toyota and drive down the road, all three of those vehicles are going to feel very different to you as you're driving down the road. And that's because each manufacturer has different priorities and different concessions that they're making in designing their product. And the same thing happens between manufacturers. So HP makes fantastic hardware. So does Canon. So does Epson. All three of these companies I'm just mentioning those because they're the big three in the printing world. All three of them make amazing hardware, but all three of them are using different manufacturers for the hardware, different manufacturers for the ink, and they recommend different manufacturers for the paper. And the reason why is when they do their calibration in the factory for how this ink should look on this printer with this paper, they know what that looks like. So just like Debbie was saying with that photo that she uses, that she knows the hue and the color mix and all that, they do the same thing in their quality control testing at the factory. So looking at something on an HP and comparing it to something on a Canon is kind of like saying, why does this green apple taste different from a red apple? Well, it's because they're both apples, but they're two different apples.
Or Max, or PC, sorry. Go ahead and bring your screen up because I'm tired of looking at this. Bring your face up. At least there's animation there because you're a little tiny guy on there. So another thing too that you have to remember is that we're using edible inks, and edible inks will never be equal to non-edible inks. Now, when we test our prints, we test them against non-edible ink, because that's where I want to get to. But no matter how hard I try, and I've been doing this almost 25 years, I mean, we've come a really long way, but they're not equal, and they will never be equal, even though we work towards it. Laura had said that she created some copywritten San Francisco 49ers helmets, and they printed beautifully. She didn't sell them, though. And her friend thought that she added icing to the cage, the face cage part of it, but she didn't, because the dimension was there. So my guess is you worked with a very high quality image as well, and had the proper settings on your printer, which does affect everything.